Ever find yourself staring at a clothing tag? Like really staring at it, wondering how they make sure that medium is actually a medium.
Or that the color doesn't fade after just one wash.
Exactly. Well, today's deep dive is all about the unsung heroes of the fashion industry. Those detail-obsessed folks who ensure your clothes are actually, oh, good.
The clothing quality inspectors.
We're going deep with RoleCatcher's insights on this one, and they've got a ton of info, not just on what these inspectors do, but also what it takes to actually build a career in this, frankly, pretty crucial field.
It's a career path most people don't even know exists.
Right. Out of sight, out of mind, as they say. But before we get into all that, let's start with the basics. What does a clothing quality inspector actually, do all day?
It's a lot more than meets the eye, that's for sure. I mean, we're not just talking about looking for loose threads here.
It's got to be more to it than that, right?
Oh, absolutely. We're talking about a deep understanding of fabrics, different types of defects, how to actually, perform all sorts of quality tests. It's pretty technical stuff.
Really? I always pictured it as a very visual job. Like, yep, that seam looks a bit wonky,
Yeah.
but it sounds like there's a whole scientific side to it.
100%. For example, they've got this test for color fastness where they, simulate the effects of sweat or sunlight on fabric
Wow.
to see if the dyes bleed or fade. They're making sure that a garment can actually withstand, life.
Okay, that's way more in depth than I imagined.
Hmm.
And RoleCatcher mentions all this tech coming into play. Like, are robots going to be replacing human inspectors anytime soon?
It's interesting, actually, because while those automated systems are great at catching, the really obvious flaws,
Right.
they still don't have that human eye.
That makes sense, I guess.
A seasoned inspector can spot a subtle stitching problem that a machine might completely miss.
Interesting. So it's more about humans and machines working together then.
Exactly. Human expertise combined with those technological advancements, It's the future of quality control.
That's fascinating. Now, where does someone even begin in a field like this? Like, what's the typical entry point?
Well, usually you're starting with those individual components, buttons, zippers, seams, the building blocks.
Makes sense. Learn the little things before tackling the whole garment.
Exactly. It's about mastering those basic inspection skills and getting comfy with all the quality standards.
Which probably seems pretty simple, but I imagine even a button has a whole list of criteria it needs to meet.
Oh, for sure. In fact,
Right.
the guide gives this great example of what, an entry-level person might say about their experience. I've gained experience classifying garments based on AATCC standards, like identifying stitching deviations, documenting findings, that kind of thing.
It's like its own language.
Mhm.
So once they've got those basics down, how does that responsibility change as they progress?
So as you move into those junior level positions, you start working more directly with those production teams.
Oh, interesting. So less about just spotting problems and more about actually solving them.
Yes. Maybe you're conducting audits or suggesting ways to actually improve the process to prevent those defects from happening again.
I imagine that takes some serious communication skills, not just a good eye for detail.
For sure. The guide highlights this example of someone at this level, and I think it says it all. I worked with production to, put corrective actions into place, and we actually reduced defect rates by 15% over 6 months.
Wow. So they're not just catching errors. They're making a real impact on the efficiency and quality of everything. That's
Right.
impressive. But what about those who really climb the ladder? Like, what does a senior level inspector actually do?
At that level, it's a lot more strategic, You're not just overseeing things, you're shaping the entire quality control process.
Okay, I'm listening.
Think mentoring junior inspectors, working directly with designers on those new products, always looking for ways to innovate, really refining the company's entire approach to quality.
So it becomes less about the day-to-day tasks and more about the big picture impact, making sure the brand is known for its quality.
Yes. And the guide uses this example. I developed a whole training program for new hires and, get this, reduced onboarding time by 20% while making sure everyone actually remembered what they learned. Plus, I work closely with the design team so we can anticipate any production problems before they even happen. It's really impressive.
Wow, talk about having your finger on the pulse of everything. They've gone from inspecting seams to influencing the entire life cycle of a garment. That's quite the journey. Speaking of journeys, I know RoleCatcher has this whole section dedicated to interview prep for aspiring inspectors. What are some of the questions people should be ready for?
Well, they're definitely going to ask about your experience with different quality standards, your approach to problem solving, and, how you handle yourself under pressure because the fashion industry is fast-paced.
Right, so pretty standard interview questions,
Right.
but what makes them unique to this specific field?
It's all about how RoleCatcher helps you tailor your answers. Like, instead of saying, I'm a good problem solver, you could describe a time you found a critical defect, figured out what caused it, and then proposed a solution that stopped it from happening again. Make it real.
Show, don't tell. What other kinds of questions stood out to you?
One that caught my eye was, how do you stay up to date on the latest trends and tech in quality inspection?
Ooh, that's good. They're not looking for someone who's stuck in their ways. They want someone who's always learning.
Exactly. And RoleCatcher gives you some pointers on how to answer that, too. They suggest you mention specific industry publications you read, courses you've taken, workshops you're interested in. Prove you're invested.
It's all about showing you're proactive and passionate about growing in the field. Really good advice. So we've talked about the day-to-day tasks, the career path, even how to nail that interview. But what about the realities, the nitty-gritty of the job?
Yeah, the good, the bad, and the maybe not so glamorous.
Exactly. And RoleCatcher doesn't shy away from that. They actually have a whole section on the pros and cons, right?
You do. And it's important to be realistic, right? Because every job has its ups and downs.
So let's get into those pros and cons, because no job is perfect. Right? What are some of the, shall we say, less glamorous aspects that RoleCatcher mentions?
Well, they're pretty upfront about the fact that, it can get a bit repetitive.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. You're looking at very similar garments day in and day out.
Right. And it's the same kind of defects you're looking for. For some people, that could feel a little monotonous.
I can see that. Not everyone's wired for that kind of hyper-focus on repetition.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But the guide actually frames this as a positive, too, for certain personalities. They say some people actually find that repetition kind of calming and satisfying.
It's true. Some people love that rhythm, that predictability.
Exactly. Like they quote an inspector in the guide who says, I've trained my eye to see these tiny, tiny inconsistencies. It's almost like a sixth sense now. So it can be a real point of pride for people.
Definitely. You become an expert in those details.
Yeah.
What about the work environment itself? It's probably not all, fancy design studios and runway shows, right?
Right. It's not the most glamorous side of the fashion world. They talk about the physical demands standing for long periods, moving around, maybe lifting heavy boxes.
Oh, yeah. I hadn't even thought about that.
And the setting isn't always ideal. You might be in a busy factory, a warehouse.
Probably not a lot of natural light or anything.
Yeah. It can definitely be a bit rough around the edges. They're pretty honest about that.
So you need to be adaptable. What about the hours? Is it a typical 9 to 5 kind of gig?
That's another thing they highlight. It really depends on the employer, but they say to be prepared for potentially long hours, especially during those peak seasons when everyone's trying to get new collections out the door.
Oh, right. When those deadlines are looming, the pressure is on.
Exactly. But on the plus side, those busier periods often come with opportunities for overtime, which can be a good thing if you're looking to, make some extra cash.
True. It's all about weighing those priorities.
Mhm.
Are there any other potential downsides they mention?
Well, one thing they emphasize is the pressure that comes with the role. You're the one responsible for catching those defects, for upholding the brand's reputation.
Oh, yeah. If something slips through the cracks, it could be a PR nightmare for the company these days.
Exactly. So it can feel pretty high stakes.
A lot of responsibility on your shoulders.
Right. But again, they spin it in a positive light by saying that this pressure can actually be really motivating for some people. You're not just, going through the motions. You're making a real difference. Your work matters.
Okay, I like that. It's about finding that sense of purpose in what you do.
Yeah.
So it's not all sunshine and rainbows, but there's definitely a lot of, like you said, motivation to be found in this role. But let's talk about the really rewarding stuff.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the things that RoleCatcher highlights as major perks of this career path?
Well, one thing they emphasize is that sense of satisfaction you get from, actually ensuring quality, knowing that your work has a direct impact on what people are wearing every day.
Yeah, no one likes to buy something only to have it, fall apart after a couple of washes. You're preventing those frustrating experiences for people.
Right. And that can feel really good.
Yeah.
They also mention the fact that you get to work with beautiful fabrics, intricate designs. You're still part of that creative world, even if it's from a different angle.
It's like a behind-the-scenes pass to the fashion industry.
Exactly. And, you're constantly learning and evolving as those trends change.
Now, we've talked a lot about this role in isolation, but one thing I appreciate about RoleCatcher is that they don't just stop there. They actually connect the dots to other potential career paths.
Right.
Like, they show you how this experience could lead to other opportunities within the fashion world.
Absolutely. They have this whole section on related careers, and it's really interesting to see where this role can take you. For example, they talk about becoming a quality assurance manager, a textile technologist, even a sustainability specialist.
Wait, sustainability specialist.
Yeah.
How does that connect to quality inspection?
Well, it's all about making sure garments are produced ethically and responsibly, which really ties into that whole focus on quality and attention to detail. Like, you might be analyzing a company's supply chains, figuring out the environmental impact of different fabrics, and working to make things more sustainable overall.
So it's applying those same skills, but on a much broader scale.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Right. It's about taking that passion for quality and using it to make a real difference in the world. And I know you were interested in the technology side of things, so you might like this other path they mentioned, clothing technologists.
Oh, yeah, that does sound intriguing. Tell me more about what they do.
Basically, they're the bridge between the designers and the production teams. They have this really deep understanding of, fabrics, how garments are constructed, the whole manufacturing process.
So they make sure that a designer's vision can actually be turned into a real, wearable, high-quality product.
Yes. And they might create those technical specs for garments, test how different fabrics perform, even troubleshoot problems during production.
Wow, that's a cool blend of creative and technical skills. I can see how someone with that quality inspection background would thrive in that role.
Totally. And that's what I love about RoleCatcher's approach. They don't just give you a narrow view of one job. They encourage you to think big picture, to see how your skills and interests could lead you in all these different directions.
I love that. It's like they're saying, hey, here's a starting point, but don't be afraid to explore and see where this path takes you.
Exactly. And, the fashion industry is so dynamic, there are always new opportunities popping up.
Now, before we wrap up this deep dive into the world of clothing quality inspectors, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought, something that really struck me as we were going through all this information.
I'm all ears.
We've talked about those technical skills, that eye for detail, but in a world where, let's face it, robots are becoming more and more sophisticated, what do you think truly sets a human inspector apart? What are those irreplaceable skills that will be valuable no matter what?
It's a really good question. Like, what makes us, uniquely human in a world that's becoming more and more automated? What can't robots do yet?
Because we've talked about those technical skills, the eye for detail, but what else is there?
I think it really comes down to those things that are hard to program into a machine.
Mhm.
Adaptability, being able to think critically, and that, genuine passion for learning.
Because the fashion world is constantly changing, right?
Constantly. New fabrics, new technologies, new problems to solve. A good clothing quality inspector, someone who really thrives in that world, they're going to be the ones who embrace all that change.
They're along for the ride.
Yes. Always learning, always growing, It's like they're not intimidated by the fact that things are always evolving.
So it's about being more than just a cog in the machine, right?
100%.
You've got to be a problem solver, an
Yes.
innovator,
Yes. Anticipate those challenges before they even happen.
and find those creative solutions.
That's what it's all about.
Well, that's about all the time we have for today's deep dive into the world of clothing quality inspectors. For anyone listening who's totally hooked on this career path now, definitely check out RoleCatcher's full guide. They go so deep on everything we've talked about and more.
It's seriously impressive the level of detail they provide.
It's not just about understanding the job. It's about seeing the bigger picture, all those potential paths you could take.
And honestly, it really makes you appreciate all the work that goes into every garment you see,
Like there's this whole world of expertise behind every stitch, every button.
Exactly. It's pretty cool when you think about it that way.
It is. Well, on that note, a huge thank you to everyone for joining us today.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions.
We'll catch you on our next deep dive into a new and fascinating career.